Hi, I'm Nick Shell. You know me as the guy who's making those videos about the MyHeritage DNA test, right? And I have recently learned something about myself, and that is, it's safe to say that I am very open about the fact that I am admittedly ignorant to much of the rest of the world, like Europe, for example. I kind of halfway said or implied that Spain was not part of Europe because of how the proximity of, well, I want to get to that in just a second, but someone has commented, and I've had a couple of people comment and actually thank me for my honesty, that as an American my whole life, even though I've traveled the world, but I've never been to Europe, that I've had people be very understanding of the fact that as an American I don't know as much about the rest of the world. And I think the word that was used was ethnocentric, also maybe even ego something. But either way, the stereotype that as Americans, we know less about the rest of the world. So I want to fully embrace that stereotype, not to present myself as some kind of moron, but just to say, you know what? I acknowledge it. It's a real thing for me. I'm not saying for all Americans or most, but outside, I'm imagining myself as a non-American, looking at the stereotypes of American, which, by the way, I didn't vote for Donald Trump for president. Okay, I'm what's called a Libertarian, so I don't vote for the major two parties that are. There's a third party which gets about 3 or 4% of the vote. That's who I vote for, right? So I didn't vote for Donald Trump. If in case what you're seeing on the news that all these Americans Donald Trump, no. But I want to attempt to explain why a person like me, being educated and intelligent, I went to college, I'm a vegan, that automatically tells you that I'm able to think outside the box. Been a vegan for years. How did I end up this way? If you ask me, if you'd say, Nick, I'll give you $1,000 if you can tell me for a fact if Spain is part of Europe. And I wouldn't be able to confidently make that decision 2 days ago, right? How did I end up this way? Well, here's what I'm going to tell you. Please don't think I'm defending myself. I'm explaining this is how people end up in this situation. That someone who's intelligent and respectable could end up having question marks about if Spain's part of Europe. I knew where it is on a map, but is it part of? Here's what I'm going to come up with. So in America, it's almost like we're living on an island. I know what America looks like and the United States looks like on a map, and there's Canada above us, there's Mexico below us. I totally get it. We're not actually an island, okay? But in a way we are. In a way we are, because you've got the contrast of Mexico below us, right? And stereotypes I think that we have about Mexico is that they provide a lot of the drugs that come to America. So you've got a lot of people who are criminals, and you've got all this crime going on, and they speak a different language. They speak Spanish. So we want to disassociate ourselves from Mexico. They're so much unlike us. They supply all the drugs that the Americans buy once it crosses the border, and they speak a different language, and they've got different physical traits than many of us. So I'm saying collectively as a country, that's what happens. So we disassociate ourselves from Mexico. We act like America it just ends on our border, and that it's a whole different world south of the United States border. Now, what about north of us though? Canada. I'm speaking to you in terms of the stereotypical American, okay? I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just telling you the perception. How if you grew up the way I did as an American, this is how you'd see the world. Canada is above us. A wonderful country. No one can say anything bad about Canada. But honestly, being the Americans that we are, it's as if we see them as the 51st state. Yeah, you're one of us. Yeah, you speak the same language. You look like us. You talk like us. You act like us. You spend money like us. You're us. We'll come on. It's as if we treat Canada like they're just part of us anyway, which I'm sure is probably insulting to many because they're not America. They're not the United States. They're their own country. but yet that's how we see them. So we don't see, I think it's safe to say that we feel very cut off from the rest of the world. Now, there's that concept, but then there's also the fact that, and I'm being honest with you, you want someone speaking honest to you, right? We don't need to know about the rest of the world in America. It's not something we're held accountable to, is probably the best word to say. We're not held accountable to needing to know. For example, when I was in 6th grade, 1992-93 school year, I had to take a geography test and fill in all the blanks of where Luxembourg is and Brussels and Portugal and all these countries that even then I hadn't heard of. And that's the only time in my life I've ever needed to even temporarily know that stuff. Now, as an American, here's typically how it's perceived to us in the news. The Middle East, there's just a bunch of war all the time. And Europe, they're our ally. And Asia's over there too. Japan's pretty cool. I've just told you the stereotypical mindset of how we're conditioned to believe. But pretty much, I feel that a lot of Americans, we just, ethnocentric, is that, yeah, I think that makes sense. That in the way we see it, the United States is this huge place on the global map, and then there's all the other countries. And we've got some that we like and some that we ignore and don't even know who they are. And then there's all the ones that have a war going on all the time, which we're over there policing the war. Okay? So I'm not excusing that point of view. I'm explaining that point of view. I'm not justifying it. I'm just saying that's what it's like when you grow up, in the 80s and 90s in America. Even though I've traveled the world, I've been to many countries across the world and I've loved it. But we don't need to know, as Americans, we don't need to know what else is out there. We got everything we need right here, and if we want to leave that and explore things, we can. But we don't need to. We're not held accountable to it. So, thank you for listening to me explain the mindset of an average American and why we're just ultimately ignorant to knowing about the rest of the countries and the rest of the world. And we're just kind of our own island, and we're doing our own thing, and we watch the news and we move on. Not justifying it, just explaining it. If you have more questions about why Americans think the way we do, I'll be honest with you and I'll tell you the truth based on my own version of being an American born in 1981.